June 8th, 793 AD. On a small island off the coast of England, a Christian monastery stood in complete silence. No walls, no soldiers, no fear. Before the sun would set, every man inside would be dead or in chains. The gold of God would be torn from its altars, and Europe would enter 250 years of terror. This was not a war. This was the moment the Viking Age began. Before this day, Europe believed the sea was a wall, a boundary drawn by nature itself, and by God. Beyond it lived storms, darkness, legends, not enemies. The coastline was not a frontier. It was a comfort. Kings ruled from behind it. Churches rose without fortifications. Monasteries displayed their wealth openly. Because no one imagined violence could arrive from the horizon, faith was armor, distance was protection, and that belief had never been tested until this morning. Lindisfarne was not important because it was large. It wasn't. It was important because of what it meant. It was holy ground, a spiritual heart of Christian England, a place where scripture was copied by hand, letter by letter, under candlelight, where relics rested on altars, untouched by greed, where men prepared their souls for eternity. Here they believed God watched closely. There were no guards, no weapons stacked by the doors, no watchtowers scanning the sea, no contingency for violence, because violence did not belong in this world. Not here, not ever. The monks noticed the ships too late, long, narrow shapes sliding out of the morning mist, low in the water, moving fast. No banners announced them. No horns sounded warning, only oars, cutting the sea with practiced rhythm. Some monks froze, some prayed. None ran, because no enemy in their world behaved like this. There was no battle at Lindisfarne, only impact. Steel met flesh where no shields rose. Axes fell on men who had never learned to raise their hands in defense. The Vikings did not hesitate. They killed those who resisted, dragged others away alive, because slaves were worth more than corpses. Altars were ripped apart, gold torn from sacred hands. Relics shattered beneath boots that did not recognize holiness. The monastery burned. Then, just as suddenly as they had come, the Vikings left. The sea swallowed them again, and Lindisfarne was left smoking in silence. The true damage was not the blood, it was the question that followed. If God did not protect his own house, what did that mean for the rest of the world? Across England, fear moved faster than any army. Priests wrote of omens, of fire in the sky, of dragons flying over the land. They were not describing monsters, they were describing panic, because something fundamental had broken. The old rules no longer applied. This was not madness, it was calculation. The Vikings had watched the coast for years. They knew where the wealth was kept, and where the defenses were not. Lindisfarne was rich, isolated, unguarded. A perfect test, low risk, maximum shock. And the lesson was immediate. Europe was vulnerable. After 793, the raids did not stop. They multiplied. Monasteries burned across Britain, then Ireland, then the heart of Francia itself. The sea was no longer a barrier, it was a highway. Every coastline became a front line. Every church a potential target. Kings built walls. Churches hid their gold. Villages prayed harder. None of it closed the door that had been open. The Vikings did not conquer Europe with numbers. They conquered it with fear. They proved that belief could be violated, that tradition could be shattered, that distance meant nothing against speed and brutality. Empires fall when armies lose. Civilizations fall when certainty collapses. Lindisfarne was the first crack. What followed was not a single invasion, but an era. Cities erased, kingdoms reshaped, bloodlines rewritten by fire and steel. The Viking Age did not begin with conquest. It began with realization that the old world was defenseless against a new kind of enemy. They came without warning. They left without mercy. And Europe would never feel safe again. Because on June 8th, 793, the sea stopped being a boundary and became a weapon. They did not announce themselves. They did not declare war. They did not even raise their voices. They simply appeared. And in that silence, everything the monks believed about the world collapsed. They arrived without warning, not as an army, not as an invasion force, but as shapes, low ships, long and narrow. So close to the water they seemed to glide across it. Silent oars dipped and rose in perfect rhythm. No splashing, no chaos, only control. No banners caught the wind. No horns challenged the shore. No signal demanded attention. There was nothing to react to. And that was the trap. The monks noticed movement on the sea. Too late. At first they did not understand what they were seeing. Fishermen, perhaps. Merchants blown off course. Anything but danger. Because danger in their world arrived loudly, with messengers, with declarations, with armies. Not like this, not from the water. Some froze where they stood, hands still clutching prayer beads, eyes fixed on the horizon. Some whispered prayers, desperate, automatic, the kind learned in childhood, recited without thought. None ran, because no enemy they had ever known behaved like this. The ships scraped against the shore, boots hit sand, and suddenly the silence broke. Not with speeches, with steel. There was no battle at Lindisfarne, no formation, no resistance, no clash of armies, only violence. Axes fell into unarmored bodies. Steel met flesh where no shields rose. Men trained their entire lives for prayer faced men trained for killing since childhood. The difference was immediate and final. Some monks were cut down where they stood, in doorways, beside altars, mid-prayer. Others were seized, dragged by their robes, by their hair, screaming. Not because they would be spared, but because they would be sold, alive. Because slaves were worth more than corpses, altars were ripped apart, gold was torn from sacred hands that had never imagined needing to defend it. Relics, objects believed to carry divine power, were smashed beneath boots that did not recognize holiness. Scripture scattered across the floor, ink soaked with blood, the symbols of eternity reduced to things that could be broken. The monastery burned, not as an accident, as a message. Flames climbed wooden beams, smoke rose into the sky, a signal visible from the mainland. Something had happened here, something impossible. And then, the Vikings left. No occupation, no attempt to hold ground. They returned to their ships as efficiently as they had arrived. Oars dipped again. The sea closed behind them, gone, as if the attack itself had been a dream. But Lindisfarne was still burning. Bodies still lay where they had fallen. And the silence that followed was worse than the screams, because it carried a question that no one could answer. If God did not protect his own house, who was protected? If holiness could be violated, what was sacred? The raid lasted hours. The consequences would last centuries. Because in one morning, the Vikings proved something Europe had never considered. That faith was not armor. That distance was not safety. That the sea was not a wall. It was a road. This was not conquest. This was demonstration. A test strike. Perfectly chosen. Perfectly executed. And the result was clear. The world the monks believed in no longer existed. The Vikings did not need to stay. They had already won. Because fear does not require occupation. It only requires proof. And Lindisfarne was proof burning on the edge of the sea. The screams did not last. The fire did not last. What followed did. Silence. And in that silence, Europe realized something unthinkable. God had not intervened. The real damage was not the destruction. It was the quiet that came after. When the smoke thinned, when the bodies cooled, when no miracle arrived to undo what had happened. Lindisfarne did not echo with divine punishment. It echoed with absence. If God did not protect his own house, what did that mean for every other place? For every church built without walls? For every monastery facing the sea? For every king who believed distance was defense? That question moved faster than any army, faster than any ship. Across England, fear spread before the facts did. Messengers carried rumors. Rumors turned into visions. Priests wrote desperately, trying to make sense of what could not be reconciled with Scripture. They wrote of omens, of skies burning red at dawn, of unnatural light flickering at night, of dragons flying over the land. Not because they had seen monsters, but because monsters were easier to accept than reality. Because reality was worse. Reality said that faith had limits. Reality said that holiness did not stop still. Reality said that the world they trusted no longer worked. Church bells rang longer than usual. Prayers grew louder, more frantic, not in gratitude, in fear. Because if Lindisfarne could fall, nothing was sacred. Kings listened to reports they did not understand. There had been no warning, no border violation, no declaration of war, just ships from the sea, gone as quickly as they had come. No enemy to pursue, no army to defeat, only the knowledge that someone was watching the coast, waiting. This was not a local disaster. It was a psychological earthquake, a fracture in certainty, the kind that does not heal. And yet, what terrified Europe the most was not what had happened. It was what the attack implied, because Lindisfarne had not been chosen at random. This was not madness. It was strategy, cold, deliberate, calculated. The Vikings had not stumbled upon the monastery. They had studied the coast for years. They knew where the rivers opened to the sea, where ships could land quickly, where escape was guaranteed. They knew where wealth was concentrated, and more importantly, where defenses were not. Lindisfarne was rich. Its gold rested openly on altars. Its relics were displayed, not hidden. It was isolated, a holy island separated by water, easy to reach, easy to leave, and it was unguarded, not because of weakness, but because of belief. The Vikings understood something Europe did not. That belief creates blind spots, that faith can replace vigilance, that the places people trust most are often the easiest to break. Lindisfarne was the perfect target. Low risk, no soldiers to fight, no fortifications to breach, high reward, gold, slaves, prestige, and above all, maximum psychological impact. The Vikings were not testing strength, they were testing reaction. They wanted to see how Europe would respond when its symbols failed. Would kings mobilize? Would churches fortify? Would fear spread? The answer came immediately. Yes, to all of it. Europe was vulnerable, not because it lacked armies, but because it had never imagined needing them here. The Vikings did not need to stay. They had learned everything they came to learn. That the coastline was exposed, that the monasteries were defenseless. That terror traveled faster than ships, and that silence was their greatest weapon. The attack on Lindisfarne was not an ending, it was a proof of concept, a demonstration strike, and Europe unknowingly had passed the test. By failing it, from this moment on, the sea would never be quiet again. Every sail on the horizon would carry suspicion. Every wave would feel like a warning, because the Vikings had shown the world something simple, something devastating. The old rules were dead, and nothing stood between Europe and the next ship on the water. It did not end at Lindisfarne. That was the mistake. Europe waited for silence to mean safety. Instead, silence became an invitation. After 793, the raids did not stop. They multiplied. What began as a single shock became a pattern, then a rhythm, then an inevitability. Monasteries fell across Britain. Not one, not a handful, but dozens. Sacred places built without walls collapsed in the same way. Quickly, quietly, without mercy. Then the ships sailed west, Ireland. Islands once defined by prayer learned the sound of oars in the dark. Monks fled inland. Relics were buried. Scripture was hidden like contraband. And still, the ships kept coming. Then the Vikings turned south. Francia, the heart of an empire that had conquered with legions, now trembled before longships. The sea was no longer a boundary. It was a road that required no permission. Every coastline became a battlefield, not because armies met there, but because danger could arrive anywhere, at any time, without warning. Kings responded the only way they knew how. They built walls. Stone rose where faith once stood alone. Churches hid their gold. Altars were stripped bare. Relics vanished into vaults and graves. Villages prayed harder, louder, longer. None of it worked, because none of it addressed the truth. The door had already been opened, and it could not be closed again. The Vikings did not conquer Europe with armies. They conquered it with fear. They did not need to occupy cities. They did not need to hold land. They only needed to prove something once, that faith could be violated. That distance offered no protection. That tradition meant nothing against speed, planning, and violence. They shattered assumptions, and assumptions are what civilizations are built on. Empires fall when armies lose battles, but civilizations fall when beliefs collapse, when people stop trusting the rules that once defined reality. Lindisfarne was the first crack, not because of what was destroyed, but because of what was revealed, that the world people believed in was not the world they lived in anymore. After that, every sail on the horizon became a question. Every quiet morning felt temporary. Every coastline felt exposed. What followed was not one invasion, it was an era. Cities burned, some were rebuilt, some were erased entirely. Kingdoms reshaped themselves around fear instead of confidence. Borders hardened, power centralized, violence normalized. Bloodlines were rewritten, not metaphorically, literally, through conquest, through settlement, through survival. The Viking Age did not begin with conquest. It began with realization. The realization that the old world, the world of protected monasteries, unguarded coastlines, and unquestioned faith, was defenseless, not against numbers, against a new kind of enemy, one that moved fast, struck without warning, and vanished before retaliation was possible. The Vikings did not arrive to destroy Europe. They arrived to expose it. And once exposed, Europe was forced to change, or die. Walls replaced prayer, fleets replaced assumptions, suspicion replaced certainty, and all of it traced back to a single moment, a single island, a single door left open, long enough for fear to walk through. From that point on, Europe would never experience peace the same way again, because peace now meant vigilance, and the sea, once a symbol of safety, had become a threat that never slept. This was not the aftermath of a raid. This was the birth of a new age, an age shaped not by belief, but by the knowledge that belief alone is never enough. Lindisfarne did not fall because it was weak. It fell because it was certain, and certainty is the most fragile wall of all. The lesson of Lindisfarne is not about Vikings. It is about belief, because the strongest defenses in history have never been made of stone. They are invisible. They are assumptions, habits, rules everyone agrees not to question. They are the quiet understanding that this place is safe. Lindisfarne believed in that safety completely, not because it had earned it, but because it had never been challenged. For generations, the monks believed their world made sense, that God protected holy ground, that distance protected the coast, that violence followed rules, that wars had borders, and warnings, and reasons. Lindisfarne did not prepare for defense, because defense would have meant doubt, and doubt did not belong in a holy place. When the Vikings arrived, they did not break walls. There were none. They did not defeat soldiers. There were none. They did not conquer a kingdom. They didn't need to. They broke something far more important, the idea that the world was predictable. That day, Europe did not lose a monastery. It lost certainty. From that moment forward, every assumption was suspect. If Lindisfarne could fall, what couldn't? If God's house could burn, what protection did anyone have? The Vikings did not defeat Europe. They did not need to. They simply showed it reality, and reality did the rest. Reality said that belief does not stop steel. Reality said that tradition does not slow a ship. Reality said that certainty is not strength. It is exposure. After Lindisfarne, Europe rebuilt itself, but not the way it expected. Walls replaced prayers, fleets replaced assumptions, suspicion replaced innocence. The world grew harder, more defensive, more aware. Not because people became cruel, but because they became honest. Honest about what belief could not do. This is why Lindisfarne matters. Not because it was the first raid, but because it was the first awakening. The Vikings did not arrive to destroy Europe. They arrived to reveal it, to show that its most trusted structures existed only because no one had tested them. And once tested, they collapsed instantly. Every civilization believes its rules are permanent. Every era assumes it understands the world, until something arrives that does not follow the script. Lindisfarne was that moment, the moment the script failed. And when belief fails, everything else follows. They came without warning, not because they were cruel, but because warning belonged to a world that no longer existed. They left without mercy, not because they hated, but because mercy belonged to rules they had never accepted. And Europe would never feel safe again. Not truly, because safety now required vigilance, and vigilance requires fear. On June 8, 793, the sea stopped being a boundary. It stopped being a comfort. It stopped being background. It became a weapon that could appear anywhere, at any time, without explanation. From that day forward, the horizon was no longer empty. It was suspicious. And that is the real legacy of Lindisfarne. Not the fire, not the blood, not the screams, but the knowledge that belief alone is never enough, and that once certainty is broken, history does not go back. It only moves forward, harder, sharper, and forever changed.